The reason why DHEA is important is that if you're deficient in DHEA, your sexual function doesn't work, your energy metabolism doesn't work very well, and it makes you insulin resistant. And insulin resistance is one of the biggest problems for driving side effects from TRT because it sets off an inflammatory cascade. Okay, everyone, hope you're doing well. Welcome to another one of my solo podcasts here for Victory Men's Health. I was thinking about some different topics to go through that I wanted to take advantage of this platform and opportunity to speak on. And I wanted to come back and have a bit of a look at pregnenolone and DHEA because I've spoken about these a lot, especially pregnenolone, because I've done a masterclass on that. I haven't yet done the DHEA masterclass. But I've been making lectures on these hormones since 2020, and I think when I added up, I can't remember the cumulative lecture hours I had on these hormones, but I think it was coming up on half a dozen or something like that. And I've run seminars virtually, in person. I've done workshops on these. I've mentored on these. I've used these with clients for years. And I can pretty confidently say that as the years go by, the way that I view these and the way that I recommend they're used and the way that I coach with them has continued to evolve, which is why I do keep having to talk about them because the information isn't static. You know, it's not like I'm sitting here just repeating all the exact same stuff that I said in 2020. A lot of the time it's about different levels of emphasis on certain points. So I wanted to do DHEA first because I've done less on that, and I think that if I had to guess, I would say that it's probably more commonly deficient than pregnenolone. Not by orders of magnitude, but if one of them's more commonly deficient, it's DHEA. Why is that? Don't know. It definitely is. But in terms of why it occurs, I would assume that because it's further down the steroidogenic cascade, that it is more impacted by the end endocrine stages of age-related hormone decline. I guess because pregnenolone is a building block for not just, the entire steroidogenic cascade, including DHEA, but also cholesterol. It makes sense. It's not cholesterol, sorry, cortisol. They all come from cholesterol, but it's a precursor to cortisol. Given that cortisol is needed for survival at a more integral level to the human body, it makes sense the body would run out of optimal DHEA producing capacity before it wasn't making pregnenolone as well as it could. That makes sense to me. So I'd assume that's why. So a couple of things to look at with DHEA. Firstly, what is DHEA? I can't pronounce the full name of it. You can look it up. DHEA is a hormone. I would call it an adrenal hormone. For a long time, it was thought of as just a precursor. It was just it didn't really matter what it was. It didn't do anything until it converted into, testosterone and then, DHT, estradiol, so on. That was debunked quite a while back. And it turned out that DHEA was important for being a precursor, but it also did stuff in and of itself. And it's interesting that there's no specific receptor for DHEA. We don't have DHEA receptors. It exerts its effect primarily through the androgen and estrogen receptors. So it actually binds to both. Now, it's not particularly estrogenic. It's a little bit estrogenic. It's a little bit androgenic, but it gets out-competed by testosterone and estrogen. So I guess we could say that it's less important than testosterone and estrogen. It's still important, but I think we can look at that and go, all right, well, if it doesn't have its own receptor and it doesn't have preferential binding affinity, it isn't technically as important. But the reason why it is important is that, one, low testosterone and low DHEA symptoms are very similar, and a lot of the things that people are particularly fixated on wanting testosterone to improve, it doesn't do that without DHEA in addition. Now, you don't necessarily have to take DHEA. You may have robust natural DHEA levels. Many people do. But if you're deficient in DHEA and you go on TRT, the TRT is probably not going to do what you wanted it to do unless you fix the DHEA issue as well. Some people will then get this backwards and say, oh, well, the TRT gave me a DHEA deficiency. That's a myth. It is a very pervasive internet myth, but I wrote a book called Beyond TRT a few years ago to debunk this. It doesn't do that. Actually, in studies, funnily enough, TRT actually increases DHEA. And people will say, well, that's impossible because when you shut down the testicles, you shut down the production of DHEA. You do in the testicles, where it is a precursor for testosterone, but 95% of systemic DHEA circulating comes from the adrenals. So, adrenal hormone. I look at it, and again, this is just like a huge bastardization of endocrinology, but I think sometimes it's just easy to oversimplify things for the sake of it. It's kind of like your body's natural version of caffeine, but it also opposes a lot of the negative effects of cortisol. So increases energy, increases mood, increases well-being, but reduces the stress. So it's like an energy drink without the side effects, you could look at it like. Now, that's not the only way to look at it, but subjectively, that's a lot what it feels like. So if you can imagine the opposite of that, it's like if you drank an energy drink every day, or you drank a triple espresso every day and then you stopped having it. That's not what low DHEA feels like exactly, but if you wanted to replicate it, that's probably how you would do it. So other things to look at with DHEA is saying, well, if you're on TRT and you have low DHEA, it doesn't mean that the TRT gave you the low DHEA. What's more likely, and what tends to happen when you see this play out thousands of times, is that people didn't measure their DHEA before they started TRT, or they've been on TRT for 10 years and they had age-related DHEA decline and the testosterone therapy had nothing to do with it. So that then kind of sets up the question of being like, well, then who needs DHEA then? If going on TRT doesn't mean that causes you to need DHEA, but then a whole bunch of people do need DHEA, how do you know if you need it? How do you know if you don't? And that's where lab testing comes in. The problem is, the limitation of all lab testing, especially hormones, is that we can't measure the receptors, or there's not a set algorithm. I wish there was like a ratio and a calculation you could just put in AI and it would just spit it out with perfect clinical application. But there's not really like a ratio, like a perfect ratio of if all your hormones are this, then DHEA should be there. And if it's not there, then you can top it up with this and get it perfect. People make it up as if that is the case, but it's not. What does determine doing that is the symptoms and the presentation. But there's not a set number or formula that you can just use. If there was, it would be so easy, but there's too much individual variability to have a set formula, plus the fact that blood testing is not pinpoint accurate at all. If you've just started TRT, it is completely normal to feel overwhelmed and confused. There's a lot of new territory to cover, and there is a lot of conflicting information. I wrote TRT 101 so that you can have everything that you need to know in an instruction manual in one place that you can refer back to, that you can have all the questions answered before they even come up. TRT 101 is my best practice approach for TRT from start to finish, and it contains everything that you need to avoid all the challenges and pitfalls that I've seen come up in my clients over the last 5 years. You can check it out via the link below. So when you're looking at DHEA in the blood, you're looking at DHEA sulfate. And DHEA sulfate will appear as DHEAS. If you measure regular DHEA in the blood, you're measuring like fish swimming across a stream. Like, it's just so wildly inaccurate and variable. The DHEA sulfate is a more stable metabolite of DHEA, so we can more accurately measure it as a proxy for DHEA activity. So we measure DHEAS, or DHEA sulfate. Now, I've got my handy little converter here. If you're in Europe, Australia, UK, DHEA should be measured in micromole per liter. And if you're in the US, DHEA is usually measured in micrograms per deciliter. If you're not using either of those units of measurement, I don't know what you're using, so you'll need to just convert one of the ones I say into your units. So in my book a little while ago, a few years back, I said that, and I stand by this, it's not a hard number, but on average, the number that tends to cause negative symptoms is a 2 or below in micromole per liter, which in micrograms per deciliter is about a 70, 75. Now, that doesn't mean that if you have like a 68 that you need DHEA, and if you have like a 76, you don't. I'm saying that that's about where the negative symptoms come in. Now, the part that's important for looking at this from a health standpoint is saying, well, if someone gets negative symptoms here, it doesn't mean that here is good. It just means that it hasn't reached the point of being a problem that it's perceivable. It's like if you gradually develop a headache, at what point do you now say, I have a headache? Like, it's gradually building to that point. It didn't go from 0 to 100 unless something happened. But usually it builds up over time. But at what point does it become a problem? Well, 5 minutes before that, it wasn't all peachy and dandy, right? So this is kind of how we need to look at this. So the problem and the limitation with DHEA is that If you give someone DHEA who has robust levels of DHEA, they don't tolerate it. Why is this? Don't know, but it definitely happens. Doesn't matter if it's a microdose, doesn't matter if it's sublingual, sustained release, topical, whatever, they don't tolerate it. I would assume that it's because the adrenals don't really like to be messed with, and people are potentially also trying to fix for symptoms related to hypothyroidism or liver issues, which I also think messes with the conversion of DHEA into its metabolites. But that's just my theory, but I can tell you in practice, if you have a high DHEA level and you just want more benefits of DHEA and you're young, it tends to cause side effects. Most of the time, acne. In the research, it makes people stink. I have heard some people report that. Now, the other limitation of the research is that they're often using what I would call a pharmacological dose of DHEA. They're not using DHEA doses that actually reflect mimicking natural production. 50 milligrams all at once or 100 milligrams all at once. That is not a physiological level of DHEA. That's just a spike like this and a fall, and it has nothing to do with replicating healthy DHEA levels. Now, if you're using DHEA as a pharmacological agent, if you're trying to use it as a drug, then that's what it's for. But if we're talking about hormone optimization therapy, the first thing we have to look at is putting it into a sustained release capsule. Because just having a spike of DHEA once or twice a day is not therapeutic. So oral micronized sustained release capsule, DHEA. There is a guy named Georgy Dinkov who's done some amazing research and presentation of research. I don't know how to pronounce his handle, but HAIDUT I think it's .me is his website. He's done a really good summary of like all his posts on that website regarding DHEA. And that's a lot of it referencing the work of the late Dr. Ray Peat. And Ray spoke about the DHEA dosing that people need being a lot lower and saying that the doses given in these studies are too high and can cause issues. I haven't seen a lot of those issues play out with HRT dosing, but I have seen a lot of the points that Georgie makes play out, which is that when we're looking at oral hormone supplementation, especially DHEA and pregnenolone, the pharmacokinetics are very important, and reaching a peak that's too high can cause undesirable effects. So this needs to be mediated by the dose and, in my opinion and my practice of it, also the release mechanism. So he talks about, I believe Georgie talks about 10 to 15 milligrams being the upper limit per day, and I think it's 5 or 10 milligrams max per dose. I think you can get away with a bit more than that if someone's deficient and you're using a sustained release agent, and ideally you're splitting it twice a day. So I recommend starting DHEA at 5 to 10 milligrams in a sustained release capsule and then increasing it to twice a day. I think the evening dose is much better tolerated though when it is used with pregnenolone. I do find DHEA in the evening on its own is stimulatory. I don't really recommend that, only if you are also pregnenolone deficient. Otherwise, just take it once in the morning. Most of the studies talk about 50 to 100 milligrams being an optimized replacement dose. I think it's much more commonly 10 to 25 milligrams twice a day, or 25 to 50 milligrams once a day at the upper limit, but that's using a sustained release capsule. It's not the same comparing 50 milligrams sustained release with 50 milligrams instant. Very, very different. And I would say that there could absolutely be concern about using 50 milligrams all at once of instant release DHEA. But if you're looking at 50 milligrams of micronized pharmaceutical DHEA, completely different, because you're not getting that peak. You're taking something that is kind of replicating taking a smaller dose every hour. And how individuals metabolize an oral hormone is hugely variable. So 25 milligrams for him would equal potentially 50 milligrams for him, or 10 milligrams for him, or even 100 milligrams for him, and getting similar numbers. So there is variability, but always start low, work up. There's no reason to start high, work down. Doesn't make any sense. So what's an end number for DHEA? Like, what's an optimized number? Well, in some autoimmune conditions that it's been studied for, tons. I mean, I believe in lupus, they talk about taking it up to 800 micrograms per deciliter, which is like a 20 nanomole per liter. That, I don't consider that outrageous. Like, I've seen young people who push those levels naturally. I don't think that's outrageous at all. And it also depends on, are you measuring the peak? Are you measuring the trough? Are you taking this once a day, twice a day? How do you feel? What are your cortisol levels? What's your pregnenolone status? What's your thyroid status? How's everything going? What are the main symptoms you're hoping to resolve? The reason why DHEA is important is that if you're deficient in DHEA, your sexual function doesn't work, your energy metabolism doesn't work very well, and it makes you insulin resistant. And insulin resistance is one of the biggest problems for driving side effects from TRT because it sets off an inflammatory cascade. So if you have suboptimal DHEA levels, you're not going to get that androgenic effect from the testosterone that impacts things like sex drive and erection quality and circulation and all of these things that you're looking for, because DHEA is also a very strong driver of libido itself. It's very important as a neurosteroid for the production of dopamine, for the synthesis of dopamine, and also for supporting just glucose metabolism in the brain. DHEA does so much important stuff for the body. It's just one of those things where if you don't need it and you take too much of it, or you do need it and you take the wrong type and it's not properly supervised and titrated and optimized, you're going to run into problems. I see people being like, oh, well, my blood said I was deficient, but, I took 50 milligrams a day and it caused me this problem, and they're taking their testosterone twice a week. And they're like, so DHEA is not for me. And I'm like, that's not the same as if someone's doing daily injections and then they get a prescribed, 5 milligrams sustained release micronized capsule to take twice a day. They titrate up to maybe 10 milligrams twice a day. And they're also doing a daily testosterone administration. Like that's two completely different protocols. It has nothing to do with DHEA being a problem. It's that it wasn't utilized properly. So you can, in the States, you can buy DHEA from like Walmart or like Amazon or like that's. It seems crazy because in Australia it has to be prescribed. In New Zealand it has to be prescribed. In some countries you can get it online, but I've seen it. When I was in the States, I saw it at Whole Foods. It's crazy. It's a hormone. So it's something to be careful with, but it's also something that's important. And if you want to learn more about DHEA, you can check out the Beyond TRT lecture on DHEA. I debunk a few myths around it and talk a bit more about the mechanisms by which it exerts its effect. And you can also check way back on the TRT and Hormone Optimization channel. I've got some really old lectures on pregnenolone, DHEA, in terms of like a really big list of the symptoms of if it's low, if you take too much. And yeah, I stand by, all of those older lectures on these topics. So it's an important hormone because if you need it, it's integral to get to where you want to go. But if you don't need it, which eventually everyone will, but if you don't need it at this point, it would potentially cause you problems. But if you haven't looked at it and you are, not optimized on your hormone therapy protocol, some people just need testosterone, but a lot of people need full hormone replacement therapy. And sadly, they're often back to front. The people who need the full hormone therapy aren't getting it, and the people who just need TRT are taking a whole laundry list of things that are causing problems. So I've been very happy to work with the Victory team on DHEA for the last couple of years. They're very well trained on it. Anyone who's trained through WorldLink should be up to date on DHEA. Dr. Keith Nichols has great lectures on DHEA. Neil Rousier has a book where he's written about DHEA. Yeah, lots of other DHEA resources out there for people who want to check it out. But don't overlook it, and I'll see you guys all for the next one. Okay, everyone. Hope you're all well. Welcome to the Pregnenolone Masterclass 2.0. This is a updated and revised version of the Pregnenolone Masterclass that I recorded about 2 years ago. Most of what I said 2 years ago, I will stand by, but there are a few updates and changes that I'd like to make.